continue our focus on Workers' Day, but a slightly different angle to all of this, and perhaps one just as important. Joining us is Professor Anita Bosch from Stellenbosch University's Business School. We're going to discuss the equality of women in the workplace. Welcome, Professor. I think you said a year or so ago that women are still being treated unfairly at work and at home, even though the topic should have reached a degree of maturity. Why haven't we reached that level of maturity?
I think society really, the major societal shift takes a long time, and certainly we're making progress, but if you look at the really important indicators where women stand in relation to men, specifically on Workers' Day, such as, for instance, the number of unemployed adults, the number of discouraged job seekers, youth in unemployment, women outnumber men in all of those categories. Women still also outnumber men in terms of the number of hours worked in a day, and also the number of hours for unpaid work, which is usually related to domestic and care work. So when we think about Workers' Day, this is really actually the other Women's Day, to my mind. And I think it is because society has grown in a particular way since the Industrial Revolution, and we've really not amended our way of thinking about work, workplaces, and how to go about
and
doing
fundamentally, you will say it is a power dynamic which is influencing the structural inequality. Yet you also say that a degree of progress has been made.
Yes.
But where is that? Where is the progress?
Well, the progress is really with access to work. And South Africa has a fantastic constitution. It protects all of us, but more specifically also has particular clauses in the constitution on gender equality for that matter. But the reality is that women do have greater levels of access should they choose to work. However, very often there's impediments based on home practices, what happens at home.
So it's still a fight, in other words.
And yes. So you can't just automatically assume that you will have a career and be able to place equal time and attention to that unless, and we see this in Europe, a lot of women decide not to have children. And very often only then can they take up careers in the same way as
You also go on to say that organizations need to take on the realities of women.
Yes.
So what realities immediately need to be taken on in order for that structural power dynamic to shift?
I think part of this would be the care responsibilities, which needs to shift, and we're seeing this in Scandinavian parts, of the world, but certainly not in the rest of Europe, for instance, which is a misnomer. People think that there's a lot of gender equality in Europe. So, for instance, care responsibilities, hours of work, where work takes place, where the workplace flexibility is embraced by more, especially corporates, and how we allow for management practice to start looking at that. And at the business school, we spend quite a bit of time on this to try and teach people how to think differently about the delivery of outputs, how to measure those, how to recruit and employ people, and what it is that you're looking for, and what practices you can employ.
Yet I would suggest to you that organizations might take that on board, but there is still an enormous amount of lip service that is paid to that particular concept.
Yes, it is, because the assumption is
made. Lots of hand-on-heart stuff, but once the seminar's over, it's back to the way people were thinking.
Yes, surely, and that can only and is slightly driven a little bit in South Africa through legislation, but I think gender mainstreaming can play an important role there, where particular numbers are chased initially, and one would say, but it's not just a numbers game, you're looking at quality, but equally so I would make that case for men as well. So when men are in the workplace, we're also looking for quality men, yet at the moment it's quantity that's driven.
Just finally, it's also up to women themselves, I would imagine, to fight a little harder, perhaps become a little bit more militant. You've been quoted as saying in the past that women are often caught up in this power play that we've been discussing, as they cannot always articulate a different way of being and acting. So what role do women then need to play in order to re-punch their way through this glass ceiling?
I think part of that is coaching and educating women about this right, and perhaps a different way of living and taking up your life. Also negotiating differently with their partners, whoever that is. We know in South Africa that we have more women-headed households than where they're households with men as the head of the household. So in reality, it's negotiating differently, but also standing up for what is your right.
How do you negotiate differently?
You negotiate differently with an individual by bringing across what your needs are and painting the bigger picture. When there's households where there's dual incomes, there's a better outcome for those families. Where there's households where mothers are educated, there's a better outcome for that family. So it plays out into the social good more so than just the individual good.
And that's where we are going to leave it. Professor Anita Bosch, thank you very much indeed from the Stellenbosch Business School.